Welcome everyone, Questine here with the discussion about some of the most difficult campaign starts in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Before patch 3.0 comes out, I'm sure I'm going to be redoing a lot of the lists I've been doing up until this point, at least for a certain section of the campaign map. Unless they do add some major changes. But starting with Taurox the Brass Bull. Now you might be a bit shocked about his inclusion on this list, but Taurox, for all his power and might, for all his ridiculousness in his campaign, he is actually in a very vulnerable position at the start of his campaign, and pretty much all the Beastman Legendary Lords, with the exception of Mogr, do struggle to accomplish anything in the course of their campaigns, and even Mogr doesn't necessarily achieve all that much. It's because of the limitations on the race. Basically, you only have one army until you can get 25 Marks of Ruination. For Taurox, this can be a bit of a problem. See, you start surrounded by factions that hate you. Well, virtually everyone hates the Beastmen. Even Chaos doesn't necessarily like the Beastmen, which is saying a lot. But you have Katep, the Sisters, Alain of Sialostra, Malekith, Helebron. And if you think you are not going to end up in a war with all these factions, yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen in this campaign. So the way you deal with that is you need to be aggressive as Taurox. You need to really get the momentum going. You need to get these benefits in his campaign. You need to get Dread. You need to fight battles. You need to get the Marks of Ruination. So here's what you need to do. Basically, if you're playing Taurox, this is the campaign plan. You take out this army. You take the settlement. You put your first Earth Zone here. Then you take out the Venom Blade. And you do your first ritual. Your second ritual. You come over here to Hotek's column very quickly. Turn 3. You take it out. The elves might still have it. You go for Sialostra. You're going to have to fight all of these battles manually. Now, let it just be said that having to fight a Dark Elven army here, a provincial capital with your weak-ass army on turn 1, then taking another Dark Elven garrison over here, then dealing with Sialostra, who will have a full stack probably by the time you encounter her, then her capital, probably an army in there, then dealing with Alain, that is a pretty harsh campaign start. And only then, you'll get 10 points, and the Dark Elves here will build a second army here. But you want to take out Sialostra and Alain before they become issues, so you need to be aggressive. You need to push here. And the problem is, of course, that you may be overwhelmed. Like, Alain is more than capable of defeating you with just his own army. Sialostra is capable of defeating you. Hell, these Dark Elven factions are capable of defeating you. You have to fight every battle manually because your auto-resolve is generally the worst in the entire game because your units have very, very low armor and very weak leadership. So they're going to do pretty badly in auto-resolve. You're going to end up in a situation where a lot of factions start declaring war on you very quickly, and you have no choice but to pursue the war. If you try and play defensively in this kind of campaign position, you will just be overwhelmed and wiped out. So you're going to have a lot of early game battles within the very first few turns. Just dealing with Sialostra and Alain within like the first 10 turns of your campaign, that is pretty damn brutal. Especially since Alain has a ridiculously powerful army. Now, of course, you could play this campaign differently, but it's not necessarily going to go very well for you. But the alternative is, you ignore this army, you put a Hearthstone over here, right? It's not going to count for anything, but you put a Hearthstone here. You start recruiting units with Taurox. Eventually, these guys will march against you. You wait for that, you ambush them, you wipe them out, you take out their settlement, you march north. You deal with the situation over here with the Ogres, or the Skaven, whoever controls the settlement. There's also an Ogre camp, and I'm pretty sure if you put a Hearthstone down here, you can take advantage of that. But even so, you're on a timer. Some people have said that the best thing you can do in this campaign is basically abandon the start position and just basically go over to Cafe. But effectively, if you want to unlock the power, you need the Marks of Ruination to unlock multiple armies. Now, once you're done with that, once you figure a way to do that, that works for you in your campaign. If you can get 2 armies, 3 armies, if you get the Dread over here, the Dread upgrades for higher level Hearthstones, higher level camps, Lords and Heroes, once you unlock the other Legendary Lords, yeah, you gain a ridiculous level of power, especially once you get the momentum going for Taurox. That's when you can become ridiculous. And as you level up more, you have a lot of regiments renowned to recruit potentially. And you always have one unit capacity for each unit. So as you get Giants, Chaos Spawn, Minotaurs, you're going to get that with these rituals. So the more you play, the more successful you are, the stronger you get. But early on, very vulnerable, very easy to lose. A single battle gone wrong in the early game will finish your campaign because your Hearthstones will not be able to stop the massive amount of armies that are going to come your way. And there's a lot of ways you can screw this up, because your army, while it has a decent amount of power, while Taurox himself has a good amount of power even from the very start, is still vulnerable. And you really can't auto-resolve any battle, because even if you do and you win, you don't lose any unit, you're still going to take significant casualties. So that's why this campaign is on this list. And number 4 is, of course, Greasus Goldtooth of the Ogres. The Ogres are a fairly limited race. There's only 2 Legendary Lords for them, and both of them do have pretty difficult campaign starts. Who knows, maybe the race will get some much needed benefits in the next patch. 3.0, as people have pointed out to me, 3.0 does seem like they're going for a major update from 2.4 that they currently have. What's the problem with Greasus? Well, like Taurox, he starts in a pretty rough position. That's actually going to get a lot more difficult once 3.0 comes out, because you're going to get at least one Legendary Lord of the Chaos Dwarf starting next to you in the Black Fortress over here. Going to be an interesting situation there to see how that goes down, because if you have a Legendary Lord of the Chaos Dwarf starting over here, you have Imrik here, you have Gorst here, yeah, this is going to be a really interesting campaign position, my gentlemen. Now, here's the thing that's difficult about Greasus. First off, you start a war with these ogres. Nothing too serious, but you're not necessarily well equipped to deal with them, but you'll be able to wipe down 2 ogre factions and dwarves. The dwarves are going to be the major issue, because you have no good units with armor piercing to actually deal with them, with the exception of these man-eaters and iron guts. So that is going to present quite a substantial issue in your campaign from the very, very start of it. The fact that these guys, on higher difficulties especially, they're going to get the full stack and they're going to throw it against you. That's one issue. The other obvious issue is Cafe. Most of the time, with many campaigns that would start in a similar position as Greasus, where a lot of caravan trade routes are ongoing, you would take advantage of that. The problem is, if Greasus tries to take advantage of that, unless it's like some faction like the Rebels or the River Lords over here, Cafe will declare war on him. Certainly, you don't want to raid Miao Ying's Cafe or Xiao Ming's caravan, because if they start coming at you with full stacks, you are done. You can't beat Cafe's army, because again, you don't have armor piercing in your units. That's kind of the major problem. I mean, you do have some units, the dual weapon ogres, but they're just a bit too expensive right now, and your economy is, by the way, pretty damn limited. And there's downsides, by the way, when it comes to these guys, like just beyond the cost. So you can't really afford a lot of troops. You can't even take full advantage of the caravans situation, and there's some nuclear situations about to develop in your campaign. To the south, you have Gorst. Gorst alone, with his own army, can defeat you. Imrik, with his army, can defeat you. To the north, you have the ticking time bomb of Greasus. To the west, you have Tretch Craventail. Yeah, I need not say more. Anyone who starts with Gorst, Imrik, Cafe, and Grimgor next to him, and none of these factions, by the way, like you, really. I mean, Cafe is kind of okay towards you, right? But they still have some aversion, and the AI is generally going to be very aggressive against the player. Like, you may not necessarily expect a war with the Western provinces if you play your cards right, but you're still going to have issues in your campaign, even from Cafe. But you have a ridiculous amount of very, very powerful Legendary Lords around you. I mean, Imrik's campaign has its own issues, fair enough. But if you think Imrik is easy to deal with when he's played by the AI, no, he is absurdly strong. He's very difficult to take down once he gets his dragon, and he actually does create a pretty powerful empire, like all the High Elven Legendary Lords do. Because the AI gets a bunch of benefits that do suit Imrik, when we're talking about his campaign. Don't get me wrong, we're going to get to him in just a moment. But the ticking time bomb is, of course, Grimgor. Grimgor, who generally creates one of the most powerful AI empires in the game. Grimgor, who is such a terror, you're utterly terrified of facing him. Because he's not just going to throw 20 units in an army against you. No, he's going to throw 40 units in a single army. And he's going to show up with a lot more than just the one army against you. Have fun with that. That is the issue. The Ogre economy is weak, their unit roster is incredibly limited, your camps are vulnerable, and Greasus himself is kind of useless in battle. He's slow, he's ponderous, he has good stats, but his animations just don't do him any favors right now. He's generally one of the worst legendary lords in the game in battle at the moment. The only ones that are worse are the ranged heroes, the archer heroes, because they struggle to shoot, so that is a major problem for them. But yeah, Gurumgar has a lot of issues in his campaign. He struggles even to defeat the minor factions against him, let alone all the major factions that currently surround him, let alone those that will soon surround him as well. There's likely going to be at least 2 legendary lords of the Chaos Dwarves in close proximity to you, and you may not have good relations with the Chaos Dwarves, so enjoy that campaign situation even further. And number 3, we of course have Settra the Imperishable. His starting campaign situation is pretty rough, though you have some ways of making it easier, but you start with a relatively limited army. You do have this army of Numas over here to deal with. Your obvious choice would be to take Numas itself. That might not be the best decision in a lot of ways. In fact, what you might want to do is deal with this army, sure, try and not take too many casualties, then move Settra right over here next to Khemri, and then on turn 2, take this settlement. It is a difficult battle, but if you can eliminate these guys very quickly, you can make your life easier. But here's the thing, even if you do that, even if you do that smarter campaign plan, like eliminating this army, turning around, holding the bridge, if they attack you by the bridge, you can hold your line at the bridge. But even with that, even going around this particular path, you're still going to end up here. You have Skarbrand to the north, he's going to declare war on you, and Numas is vulnerable, and you kind of want to hold as many settlements as possible. You have Manfred to the south. Yes, you can rely on Volkmar to help you out, but still, a difficult proposition. You do have Forik. You can make a good working relationship with Forik, but you might also end up in a war with him. It's kind of split on that. Then you have the fact that Tic-Tac-Toe, Mr. Tic-Tac-Toe over here to the south, is likely going to declare war on you, as he does against every other lord. Like, in this campaign situation, it was either going to be Settra or Volkmar, to be honest. The thing that benefited Settra, the thing that benefited Volkmar is that at least he can recruit multiple armies. He has a rough situation, but he can recruit more armies. You're going to take 14 turns to recruit an additional army, or by getting a Book of Nagash. What's annoying, like in this case, this was really, really lucky because I got the book here. So in this campaign, in order to actually gain power to deal with all the myriad of problems you have to take that battle. It's a difficult battle. Then you have to deal with Qatar and Numas. Then you come over here, more vampire counts. It's always lovely, because on high difficulties, these guys will have multiple armies to throw against you. Your army will be stronger than them, but it is also going to be limited. You deal with Lamia, you take up the Book of Nagash, you sell this territory to Khalida. You may take Karakos along the way to sell it to Forik to get those relations. You're going to end up with Skarbrand burning your settlement to the ground. What's annoying about him doing that with Numas is that because of the hurt zone that's put here, if the ritual is done, you may not be able to recolonize. Hell, you might want to deal with Skarbrand on your own terms, but yeah, enjoy picking a fight with Skarbrand of all people with a weak-ass army of just 2 good tomb guards. Limited range, only chariots. Have fun with that particular campaign proposition. Well, you're also got Manfred pressuring you from the south. And then, of course, you're at war with Arkhan. Arkhan is always going to, on high difficulties, Arkhan is always going to dominate this campaign situation. On lower difficulties might not be the case, but on higher difficulties is going to be the case. If you can overcome that, yeah, have fun. But this campaign is brutal for the first 14 turns until you can get a second army or a third army going in this campaign. If you do manage that, you do have a lot of power, but it is pretty brutal early on. Now, at number 2, we have, of course, Prince Imrik of Caledor. To be quite honest, in a lot of ways, Greasus probably deserves this number 2 spot in a significant number of ways. But the problem is, Imrik has a lot of issues. A significant number of issues. And while Greasus might be able to some extent at least overcome his early game issues in particular, not his overall campaign issues, his early game, Imrik cannot. Regardless of how good you are as a player, you're limited by just the bad design of this, which slows you down, which makes your life harder. Let me explain. On turn 2, you'll get the quest to confederate Kalidor. That quest requires you to occupy, loot, sack 6 different settlements. It doesn't count if you occupy the settlement on turn 1. So what you're going to have to do, take out this army, wait outside the settlement, sack it on turn 2, build an army, a secondary army on turn 1, start moving it, like just the limited number of movement that you can do on turn 1, start moving it towards the Bone Gulch, so you can occupy it on turn 3, if you're quick enough with that. You may not be able to do so, because the way that quest works, you can get more towards the counter if one turn you sack with one army and the turn after that you occupy with a different army. You do the same with Ash Ridge Mountains, and then you move north. You need to deal with the Darkhold, deal with Trash Craventel. Have fun dealing with Skaven. Skaven are a nuisance to deal with. Anyone that starts near Skaven have a difficult early game situation. For you, it's difficult because you have such vast distances to cover, which means you're vulnerable to being ambushed by Tretch, which, by the way, he gets a benefit to that in his campaign. You also need to do this entire game over here with sacking and occupying settlements in that specific way, because you need to get that counter up very quickly, or quickly enough, because if you don't, you won't be able to confederate Kalidor. Fun fact about confederating Kalidor: unless you have enough influence, you will pay a price diplomatically with the High Elven factions, and you're also going to pay a price because you've confederated the faction. The best thing you can do in a campaign is build up 25 influence. Have fun with that. So you want to go fast, but not so fast that you don't have enough influence. It is excruciatingly painful to deal with. And because you're waiting to take these settlements, because you're sacking one turn, occupying another time, you're not able to replenish if you don't have enough movement points for encamp stance. You're giving your enemies time to maneuver. Even without considering that implication, even if you just literally start occupying these territories, you're just screwing yourself, really, because you need vision with Ulfwan to be able to trade with them. The High Elven economy is nothing without trade. You need trade for your economy to function properly. You depend on it in a lot of ways, because you generate trade goods. Like, your income building doesn't generate enough money on its own if you don't have trade, because you're generating those trade resources through the Elven trinkets. That's how it works for the High Elves. This has been one of the major problems in Imrik's campaign since Warhammer 2. But that kind of situation, the annoying situation, the quest, the fact that you're giving Tretch time to expand, all that kind of stuff, that's not even the worst of it. You have Queek over here. He's going to take basically all of these territories, like these 2 provinces, and then he's going to declare war on you, most likely, after he's finished wiping out Karakazul or weakening them significantly. So you want to expand north to deal with Tretch, but then you have Queek coming in from the west. You obviously have Gorse to the east. You also have Greasus, who isn't really much more than a speed bump, but you do have those issues to deal with. You may even have Scarbrand showing up in this campaign, and of course, you're on the clock to do this as quickly as possible because you have Grimgor. This campaign is also going to get worse once they add in the Chaos Wars, because, yeah, the Black Fortress is there. A Legendary Lord is likely going to be there. That may be a bit too close. We'll see how they redesign these provinces, but it's going to be a rough situation for Imrik to deal with in his campaign over here. It's already a rough situation. It's going to get a lot worse with the DLC, I feel. Now, of course, at number 1, we have Tsarina, Catherine, and of course, Kastaltin as well. Both of them have their own difficulties in their campaign. Which of them is more difficult in the early game? Well, that comes down to a number of factors. Both of them can have very, very difficult early game situations. But one Kislev campaign that is certainly not difficult in any way, shape, or form throughout, probably, is Boris Ursus. Some people think his campaign is difficult. I'm a bit baffled by it. Now, I guess if you don't understand that you can leave your province and come over here and just annihilate everyone that stands in your way, that's alright, fair enough, but that's what you should do. You take your massive army here, 2 Tsargar, 2 Armor Cossars, 2 Bear Riders, you auto-resolve this battle, you auto-resolve the settlement battle, You spend 2 turns recruiting Kossars for both global and local recruitment. You take the Frozen Landing, you take the temple, and then you can either go to war against Prague, or you can sell the temple to Prague, maybe even the Frozen Landing. That's your decision on what to do on that. Selling the Frozen Landing may not be the best decision because there might be Cathayan caravans coming this way. So you might want to build a second army over here and start recruiting a lot of units here, because if a caravan is heading for the Frozen Landing, it's a popular destination spot for them. If they are coming here and you raid one of them, you can benefit greatly from the influx of money. But you're not going to struggle with money in a Boris campaign because you have 2 items that you can gain very quickly and 5,000 gold each of them. And then you just move your army through this territory, either by conquering it outright or through diplomacy. You go and annihilate Fraud. And I use the word annihilate quite easily. Fraud, who is a major menace for both Castalton and Catherine, is easy for Boris, because you have the heavily armored units that do well in auto-resolve. You show up here, you just auto-resolve Fraud. Maybe if he has 3 full stacks, or 2 full stacks and the full garrison of Hellpit, you might have to fight the manual battle outside of Hellpit. But outside that, this is really, really easy. Then you deal with Trog, all that. Now, for Catherine, Castalton, the situation is different. Catherine has some really difficult battles that she has to fight manually, because she'll lose a lot of units if she tries and fight them for out-resolve. She has to fight this army, she has to take this settlement, then she has to recruit a lot of units to deal with this army efficiently, then she has to march here very, very quickly and try and eliminate Fraud before he becomes too big of a threat. Because if you give Fraud enough time, he will become a major issue. It's a priority to eliminate him as Catherine very quickly. Therein lies the problem. Now, if you can eliminate Fraud, and you eliminate Trog, and maybe Azazel, you're in a good campaign situation. For Castalton, it's even worse in a lot of ways, because you have, again, you have some difficult early game battles. You're bleeding supporters from the start, because you're fighting another Kislev faction from the start. And the best thing you can do in a campaign as Castalton is actually engage in diplomacy with the Brotherhood here, and declare war on Azazel through that diplomacy. Like, have them pay you to declare war on Azazel. The reason you want to do that is because you want to lure Azazel towards you. So you take out this army, you start marching around here to take the settlement. Once you take it, Azazel might be coming for you. That's a really hard fight, because Azazel is a monstrosity. But if you win it, and it's the best thing you could do in your campaign as Castalton, if you win that battle, you just eliminate the major threat. You start recruitment of a second lord on turn 1, by the way, in Erengrad, and with those armies you take the Tower of Crack, and you give it to the Brotherhood of the Bear, because you want to keep the Brotherhood alive. That's why you're so aggressive against Azazel. And then once that's done, you go deal with Fraud. But still a pretty brutal early game for both Catherine and Castalton. For Catherine, the worst situation though is not the fact that she still has to deal with Azazel and Fraud and Trog, but she might also have to deal with both Azag and Draika. Now, here's a strong recommendation for anyone playing Catherine's campaign. Don't antagonize Draika and Azag. Don't engage diplomatically with the Ostermark unless you want to declare war on the Ostermark. Don't engage diplomatically with either Azag and Draika, because what will happen if you take these settlements very quickly, what will happen is Azag and Draika on Legendary very hard, that's what I'm talking about here, will ignore you and fight each other. That is the ideal scenario for you as the player. If you end up in a war with Draika and Azag, and you can, I've had this happen to me, because I was naive enough in one of my early campaigns to say, oh, okay, let me just get a non-aggression pact to Ostermark, right? Especially once Ostermark starts suffering between Azag and Draika, I was naive enough, so I got some deals, and then Ostermark got wiped up. Then guess who Draika and Azag came for after me? Now, if you deal with Fraud, Azazel, and Trog, then you go deal with Draika and Azag. For all the Kislev Legendary Lords. Doesn't matter who you were talking about. You may want to take Prague for military force, or you might want to engage with Prague diplomatically. Those might be your decisions here as Kislev. Depends on how you want to do it. The benefit with engaging with them diplomatically as opposed to conquering them is you don't have to pay the devotion cost for the declaration of war, because if you declare war on a fellow Kislev faction, you pay a substantial substantial cost in devotion, 100 devotion. That is pretty significant. And if you wait, they'll get Prague to tier 3 and get a bunch of structures there that you don't have to pay for. So that's the benefit there in taking the diplomatic route. And eventually, look, eventually Prague is going to suffer because the Skaven here of Clan Ferric are going to come for them and wipe out their armies. So they're going to be weak. They're going to come and beg you. It doesn't matter if you're Castalton or Katrin or Boris Ursus. Though Castalton and Boris Ursus do gain a diplomatic benefit, whereas Katrin does have some pretty poor relations with them from the very start of her campaign. But you can overcome that. It's not necessarily too big of an issue. And then the best thing you can do is go over here and deal with conquer Sylvania, of course, both northern and southern Sylvania. Take some territory here in Azak's territory, like sack the Griffinwood, take the gold mine, but the settlements here, you should take Karak Raziak and give it to Ungram. He's likely going to take the capital. You just want the gold mine anyway. You can keep control of this province pretty easily. You take the gold mine, give Karak Raziak to Ungram, you make a deal with Ungram, you can sell him a bunch of territories all the way to the north, and have him hold the flank while you expand the empire and conquer the empire. So it's really the early game that's brutal for Kislev, but their long-term plan is conquering the empire because it has a lot of economic potential, and then going north to conquering the Chaos Wasteland. But early game for Castalton and Katrin is brutal. Now for Boris. Boris auto-resolves everyone over here, including Azazel. It sounds ridiculous when you think about it, but I've done it multiple times. Even on this channel, really. It's pretty easy. Because you have a really powerful army, you can get the second one, you'll have the money for it, for all the diplomatic maneuvering for the territory you're selling to factions. Like, Frat will have these territories. Okay, you take them back, you sell them to Katrin and Castalton. Tons of money over here, very, very quickly. So Boris, is astounding how major of a difference it can be between Castalton, Katrin, and what Boris has to deal with, but it is there. And it just comes down to Boris having a very powerful early game army and starting with the Patriarch. Anyway, that's all there is to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.